everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm so pleased to see you all on our call today when we're gonna go around the Baltic States with Jacob Shoshan. Born in Jerusalem, he is a licensed tour guide in Israel, as well as a teacher and a lecturer at the Tour Guide College in Israel. He's also a senior tour director and lecturer for the Geographical Society Israel. Shoshan has visited 98 countries and led tours in 65 countries on all 6 continents. Wow. Jacob is fluent in 15 languages. He presented in-depth discussion on Jewish history, philosophy, and culture, and is deeply involved in Holocaust education. We're so thrilled to have Jacob with us today. Please submit your questions to me during the event through the chat, and Jacob will answer them at the end. Thank you so much.
Shalom, everybody, and welcome on board. We'll visit today a different part of the world than most people usually travel to, unfortunately. Otherwise, it is a very interesting and very important from the Jewish point of view and historical point of view. So we'll be visiting these 3 countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. We'll start in Tallinn and conclude in Vilnius and Kaunas in Lithuania. Look at Estonia, as we can see on the map of the European Union, one of the many countries of the European Union. But historically, we go into a very interesting place. For the longest time, Jews were restricted from living in different parts of the Soviet or the Russian Empire before the Soviets. That was called the Pale of Settlement. Even those of you who heard from their ancestors who came from Russia, chances are they came mostly either from the Ukraine in the south or from the Baltic States, which were part of the Tsar Empire, of the Russian Empire for the longest time. So it's an important item to remember, the Pale of Settlement. Estonia is a tiny little country born after World War I, then again occupied, born again after the collapse of the Soviet Union. You see very few people live there, even though the territory is about twice as large as the state of Israel. Before the war, there were about 5,000, for Second World War, about 5,000 Jews living there. Unfortunately, the Jews who are there now are Jews who came and moved there after the Soviet Union took over, because unfortunately, overwhelming majority of the Estonian Jews were killed in the Holocaust. To relate to this area, we have to talk about a very interesting story. That was the Hanseatic League. For many centuries, a treaty of merchants, regardless of ethnicity, language, nationality, whether they were part of this kingdom or this realm, they maintained an incredible network of trade and commerce, which has attracted, needless to say, many Jews to this area. The first Jews have arrived in Estonia in 1333. That's the oldest document we found about Jews coming to this part of the world. You have noticed there are a few links to website. At the end of this presentation, you all are going to get this full presentation. So on your own, you can click and visit many of the website, and I also have some video clips. So it's all yours to enjoy. Today, Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, looks like a Lilliput city. It's very picturesque, very colorful, with the turrets, with the walls, with the palaces. Actually, the town is divided in 2. The upper town, which was the dwelling place of the German merchants, they were the ones running the show for centuries. And the commoners, the locals, lived in the lower town, down below. Needless to say, at that latitude, the days are very, very long in the summer, but end very early in the winter. This is a major destination for lots of the cruise ship that visit the Baltic Sea. It's the only Baltic state visited on the Baltic Sea, which goes to Russia, Sweden, Norway, Finland, what have you. but Tallinn is definitely a must on most of the itineraries. You get off the boat, you enter the walls, you go into the old city with the very beautiful medieval houses and 17th and 18th century buildings in the city square. Outside the city is a very interesting palace. This is Kadriorg, and that was the place where Peter the Great resided when he was building St. Petersburg. That was his base. St. Petersburg is just a couple hours away. Today it houses a nice small museum. Estonians, a small nation, as you saw, just a little over 1 million people, have an incredible hobby. They sing. Everybody belongs to a choir. Every 5 years, they have an incredible event. Tens of thousands of people come for the song festival. The height of the song, imagine 30,000 people gather on one stage and sing together. It's the most unique event anywhere in that case. And you see they all wear their traditional costumes and outfits. Every region has their own outfit. And following the songs, they have a huge, beautiful dance festival, folk dances from all over the country. The synagogue, which was built in this town, was destroyed in World War II. First, it was the Russians who bombed it, and then the Soviets, when they came in, they didn't want the Jews to have any place of prayer, and it was only 14 years ago that the new synagogue was built up. A rabbi, a Chabad rabbi, needless to say, came and handles now the Jewish community. Very few people really keep kosher or keep the Sabbath and holidays, but he is at least providing the infrastructure for this kind of needs. Next door is a very small but interesting museum, a Jewish museum. Here we have a picture of a synagogue that does not exist in the town of Tartu. We leave Tallinn and we drive to the area which is called Klooga. Klooga is the northernmost concentration camp and subsequently death camp in the network of the camps. Over 2,000 camps were set up by the Germans during the war. Klooga is the northernmost one. Here, the Germans didn't drive the Jews to the death camps like they did in Poland and from the rest of Western and Central Europe. Across the border, the gauge of the railway was different. That was the Tsar intention when he built the railroad, so the Prussians at the time in the 19th century will not be able to invade the country. So here, instead of taking the Jews to the death camps, they sent these hit squads, the mobile killing units, they called them, the Einsatzgruppen. And that's where Jews were killed in the largest number. It was in situ. They didn't bother much taking them to different places, either in the village, in the synagogue, which they locked and burned the people with the Torah and everything, or took them to the forest, made them dig ditches and shot them into the ditches. Klooga was set up when there were really no more Jews in Estonia, but they needed people to work. So they set up this kind of concentration camp, which was a labor camp. And people were brought here from all over. It was mostly the Jews from Lithuania, 2 countries over, who were brought to work in the various factories they set up in this camp, which was away, remote, separated by like a thick forest from the town. And that's where the abuse took place. And soon as they saw the Russians advancing, they have killed the remaining 2,000 Jews, just days before the Russians came in. So when the Russians came, they found these 2,000 bodies. They piled them up on these pyres to prevent, of course, epidemics. It was not possible even to dig tombs for all these people. Now the forest has a very interesting memorial. You walk through the forest and every now and then you see yet another sign with some more pictures and more stories and more details about the plight. And it's so pristine, it's so quiet, it's such a beautiful forest. And unfortunately, it has this kind of story. You might remember this document. That was the famous list presented to 15 of the leading members of the Nazi government. It was a beautiful, sunny, bright, sunny Sunday or in January 42. Everything was covered around with snow, but it was a bright day, and they gathered for breakfast in a villa that used to belong to a Jewish banker before they took it in Wannsee, which is a suburb of Berlin, right on the shores of the small lake. And this document has the figures of what still was in Europe as far as Jews were concerned. I'm showing it for two reasons. Estonia in Germany is Estland. So as you see, by January 42, Judenfrei, no more Jews in Estonia. They wanted the whole continent to be Judenfrei. Luckily, they did not manage, but unfortunately, of course, so many millions fell victim to it. How could they compile this list? I'd like to suggest you look up this unbelievable book. They approached a calculator building company in the United States in the 30s and asked them to project and give them and tally the number of Jews in various countries in Europe, whether the countries that were occupied or neutral. It's an incredible thick book, IBM and the Holocaust, just unreal. So here we have some of the memorial, another one of the memorials that tells the story about the 20 labor and concentration camps in Estonia. We leave Klooga and we drive south on our way to Latvia. We enter the land of the Litvaks. When usually people talk about the Litvaks, you might have had it maybe in your families, you heard some discussions. What do you put in the gefilte fish? The Galicianers, they put sugar. The Litvaks put salt. The Litvaks were supposed to be the one who were very sharp, who were very bright, and so on. So when we talk about the land of the Litvaks, it's not only Lithuania, but big parts of Latvia and big parts of Poland are called to the land of the Litvaks. Latvia is a slightly larger country, both in territory and in population, still under 2 million people. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were 200,000 Jews there. When the war broke, World War II, there were about 80,000, and you see the number of Jews living there now. The country, as you see, borders the Baltic Sea, Estonia, Russia, Belarus, and Lithuania. The city is a little bigger than Tallinn, with another beautiful medieval town and ancient and beautiful buildings, very colorful, very ornate, with gorgeous spires and cathedrals and ancient buildings. A very pleasant place to stay at and walk around, enjoy the outdoor coffee shops and the small boutiques and the nice restaurants, whether they're at street level or rooftop. Definitely worthwhile a visit. A remaining item from the time of the Tsar, when the Russian Empire was here, a beautiful Russian church. And on the new side of the city, a unique treasure grove. That is a huge Art Nouveau quarter, a whole quarter with dozens and dozens of magnificent buildings built at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, in the Art Nouveau style. This is like one of the most important collection of Art Nouveau buildings anywhere in the world, definitely here in this part of the continent. 11 of the most beautiful buildings were built by a Jewish architect, Michael Eisenstein, the father of Sergei Eisenstein, who was this famous Soviet movie director. Interesting to see that they also here mention the presence of some Jewish people who were here. You will see a sign, for example, relating to the fact that Sir Isaiah Berlin lived here in this house. And it's quite interesting to see lots of signs now in Hebrew and English talking about the presence of Jewish personalities in these countries. Look at the beautiful staircase, which is in this building, which houses a small Art Nouveau museum. A modern building is the library. And look at these strange looking buildings. These were hangars for Zeppelin. You know, they were these famous flying machines, like huge hot air balloons that carried people across, and these were the hangars where they would be taken care of. No more Zeppelins, but now these buildings house very colorful and very beautiful marketplaces. Right next to them is the Ghetto Museum, an actual cattle car, and inside the building, many facts and figures describing the plight of the Jews during the existence of the ghetto and how it ended. The Great Synagogue, and the Great Synagogue has a very interesting story. You see, before the Germans even started their activity, the local militias rounded up people in the street at random, put them into the synagogue, closed the door, and burnt it like they've done in dozens of other places. Jews could not escape, and we think that over 400 people were killed during that time. What is interesting to see next door to the ruins of the synagogue, look at this memorial. It looks like a wall which is going to collapse, but some items actually hold it up, and they provide like a window that light can come through. These pillars have the names of the hundreds and hundreds of the righteous among the nations, non-Jewish people who, risking their lives, helped to save the life of Jewish people. The only person featured like almost in person is Janis. Slipke. We'll visit him later on and tell his story. As we go through the museum, we see here the number of the Jews in Letland. Letland is Latvia, Lithuania is Estonia. So you see only 3,500 Jews left at the time when in 42 they made this list. The ghetto still exists. Very few buildings were demolished. So we look at the old pictures and we can feel how did it look like at the time when they were walking around with the Star of David, the streetcar that used to go through the ghetto. Jews were brought here in large numbers from Germany and Austria. But for them, they set up a special section in the ghetto. They have divided the ghetto by a fence. On one side was the Latvian ghetto, and the German ghetto, the German Jews, were kept in the other side. This picture shows the Jews driven out of the ghetto at the time when they're about to liquidate the ghetto. They were taken to a forest nearby. The suitcases left behind indicate the fact that they came, as I mentioned, from Austria and Germany. You can read the details when you look at the presentation on your own. And as I mentioned, you walk now and most of these houses still exist. Lots of the people died during the existence of the ghetto of starvation, epidemics, exhaustion, torture, old age. They didn't take them to the Jewish cemetery. They just dug a big hole in the garden right next to the ghetto, and that's a mass grave for God knows how many thousands of people. For the longest time, there was no indication. Only after independence, Jewish organizations were able to come and erect some memorials to tell the world about what has happened here. They took the Jews to the forest, mostly three forests in the area, Bikernike forest, and the famous one is the Rumbula forest. So they have made them walk for a few miles, and they evacuated the ghetto. And look at when it happened. Only on 2 days, on November 30th and December 8th, 41, 25,000 Jews. That's one of the largest number of Jews killed within 1 day, or in this case, 2 days. Today, there is an interesting memorial with the stones that have some names that were put up in random. What is upsetting was, and that was the case in many places in Eastern Europe, if they did put up a memorial, look what it says, the victims of fascism. So it was written in Latvian, in Russian, because everybody was Jewish, they allowed the Jews to put Yiddish. But if you can't read Yiddish and you don't know what it is, you don't know that they were Jewish people. The big activity now is to put this additional indication in English, in Hebrew, in various languages, saying they were all Jews. These are the mass graves of the 25,000 Jews who were killed here. Nearby was another very interesting and awful place, that was Salaspils. Here they killed thousands of Jews, but nearly 100,000 Soviet soldiers, citizens, people who were brought here from different places, an unbelievable place, Salaspils. The synagogue in Riga, the main synagogue survived. It was damaged, but it survived. Before they were able to come in and ransack it, the neighboring building is a church, and the Catholic priest snuck in at night. He knew that the Germans were going to come the next morning, and he took the Torah scrolls and he was hiding them in the church throughout the years of their presence, and he gave them back after the war. An incredible, noble deed. A big building houses the Jewish community. It was built and used before the war. It has a theater building, convention area, a small museum that tells the story. This was the house of Janis Slipke. He lived on an island in the river, which runs right outside Riga. And in the basement, in the cellar, and in the various shacks he had in the garden, everything looked very chaotic. The Germans never bothered looking, and that's where he was hiding dozens of Jews. Today, there is a beautiful new museum done in a very, very special way, very sophisticated presentation to tell the story. We were very fortunate to be able to host Janis Slipke in Jerusalem. This is him at Yad Vashem, at the Eternal Flame in the Memorial Hall. He had a son who immigrated to Australia, and the Soviets let him travel to Australia. On the way, he made a short stop, unbeknown to the Soviets. He changed planes, came to Israel. We treated him royally. He planted a tree in the garden of the righteous among the nations. And we never stamped his passport, and we never showed the pictures until after the demise of the Soviet Union. We continued driving from Riga down south, crossing the border into Lithuania. About the same size in territory as Latvia and much larger population, even though the population is dwindling. Now that they are part of the European Union, many young people leave and go west to find better future, they hope, for themselves. Out of 220,000 Jews that lived here before the war, 3,600 Jews live here today. Lithuania has one of the highest percentage of extermination of the Jewish community. 92% of the Jewry of Lithuania was killed in the Holocaust. On our way, we stop at a very interesting Catholic site, the Hill of Crosses. It was a way of protesting against the Tsar regime. They were Orthodox, the Russians. The Lithuanians are Catholics. And the Russians will burn it down. They'll come again and they'll burn it down. And it became like a national symbol. And Catholics from all over the world come and put crosses. Nobody can count millions and millions of crosses on the Hill of Crosses. As we travel through the countryside, almost every little village, every county, every hamlet, manor or whatever must have had some Jewish families living nearby, because they lived in the countryside, most of them, not in the towns. And we do have some pictures telling us the story, and some of the houses still survived, where you can see the very typical houses where the families lived. Maybe some of your ancestors came from that part of the world, so you can actually see what were the houses like. We have some pictures, not too many, of the way the Jews lived and what they did in these villages. And of course, lots and lots of memorials. That's, for example, in the town the Jews called Shedova. In the town of Shayolai, we'll talk about a very interesting person. Chaim Frankel has set up a shoe factory, which was the largest shoe factory in Europe. He was producing for Western Europe and for the Russian Empire. And he had a huge plant with thousands of employees. He built himself a gorgeous palace, which is today a beautiful museum. He built a synagogue for the employees of the factory. And nearby, that's where the ghetto was set up. An aerial photo of the ghetto shows us inside also we have where the synagogue used to be. Right outside, we have, of course, lots of memorials where people will come and celebrate memorial services. I want to talk out of the many towns, I want to talk about this particular one in particular, Malat. The community, the Jewish community here was annihilated completely. And it was mostly done by the hands of the local accomplices. We have to remember the Nazis perpetuated horrible crimes, but in many cases they were gladly aided by local accomplices who, of course, other than good old Jew hate and anti-Semitism, they profited. Jews were taken, so they left their property, they left their houses, they left the furniture, maybe some valuables. So the entire city was, the entire Jewish community of the town was annihilated. And here we have a sign when they celebrated, they commemorated 75th anniversary of the massacre. A beautiful monument was set up. 2 additional monuments were put where some of in this place, it was the Jewish men who were taken to be killed. In another location, Jewish women and children. To keep the charade, to keep the way to disguise what they were going to do, they would say, oh, you are going to be taken to work. So nobody would be cautioned until, of course, it was too late. We'll come into Vilnius, which is probably the most beautiful city in the Baltics, one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. Old and new on one side of the river, on the left is the old town, in the new town, very modern skyscrapers and modern buildings. The Cathedral Square is very interesting because of a special story. Here was in the 17th century, a family, noble people from Poland. At that time, the Vilnius was part of Poland. And this nobleman, a Catholic guy, traveled to Western Europe, met some Jews, was fascinated by Judaism and converted to Judaism. He became a Jew. But when he came back to visit, the church captured him and burned him alive right here in this Cathedral Square. We'll talk about him soon when we'll see his grave in the cemetery. Again, a magnificent little town to walk in the old town, beautiful story of the Jewish community. The main synagogue, the great synagogue, did not exist. It survived the war. It did not survive the Soviet Union. It was a very busy, very popular place, part of not only the synagogue itself, you see how it looks like after the war, but a focal point for lots of the Jewish activity that took place in the Jewish neighborhood which surrounds the synagogue. One of the institutions that was set up here is a fascinating place, the YIVO Institute, set forth by Max Weinreich, who was a linguist, and also his son was a famous linguist, both of them, of course, by now are gone. He was able to escape to the United States, and on the site where the YIVO Institute used to be, they had this memorial recently put. Now this YIVO Institute functions in New York City. It's in Manhattan on 15th Street. And here is a visit of the president. This lady is the president of Lithuania visiting the YIVO Institute. What's interesting, behind her is the map of the Vilna ghetto, which hangs in the YIVO Institute. Look, please, at this map that shows us the dozens and dozens of Jewish communities in Lithuania. The next map is almost identical. The next map shows us the killing places. Almost in every Jewish community, there would have been some massacre or more. You see, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2. Repeatedly, they would call it akcja, action. In Vilnius itself, they set up 2 ghettos. A small ghetto, which existed for 2 months from September 23rd 41 to to November 21st, and the big ghetto which survived until 1943. This is an aerial photography of the ghetto. Again, it's very interesting when you walk around in the street, you see lots of the signs. The ghettos are gone, but you see the signs with the maps of the ghettos. For this one, for example, we are at the gate of the small ghetto. This one is where the gate of the big ghetto used to be, and of course, lots of memorials throughout. This was the place of a very dramatic scene. Many events took place here. That was the offices of the Judenrat, the Council of the Jews, the one who ran the affairs. They would be in charge of distributing food, distributing work permit, taking care of medical needs, whatever they could do. And unfortunately, they would be the one to choose the people who had to be sent away. They thought they were going to be sent away for work. Later, of course, they realized it was to their death. The area around the synagogue was called the Schulhof, and it had 11 synagogues, not only the great synagogues. Now, none of them exist. Here we have a picture of the Vilna ghetto police. Jews were executed in the ghetto. Apparently, these two young men were blamed of being thieves. What's interesting is during the existence of the ghetto, there was a theater, and the theater functioned. They performed, they played music, they put shows on. After the war, of course, everything is in ruins. By the way, the theater still exists. That's what it looks like nowadays. The cemeteries were devastated, and now they put the signs in the former Jewish area, Jidu Gatve, Jewish street, leading to Gaon Street, the famous Vilna Gaon. Here is this outstanding rabbi. You see, he died in 1797, born in 1720. And he lived in the house here. His statue stands here in a very prominent location in the Jewish quarter. And you'll be able to read a lot. He was a fascinating rabbi and a scholar. Another interesting person in town was Dr. Tzemach Shabbat. He was a pediatrist, and he would tell fascinating stories. The kids liked to come to the doctor because of his stories. A recently put here statue is very interesting. That's a water carrier. Many of the poor Jews who had no education and couldn't have a business or anything, to make a living, they would carry water from the river because they didn't have running waters in their houses at the time. I personally love very much the facial expression that the artist has put here on the statue. Out of the 110 synagogues and prayer houses that existed in Vilnius before the war, only one exists now. Hardly any services are being held. There is a Chabad rabbi who came, but he has the services in his own place, not a full-fledged synagogue as we have here now. Vilnius was famous for a major Jewish printing house. There was the Widow and Brothers Rom. They published the Talmud. They published newspapers, publications, lots of books, novels, all kinds of interesting stuff. And you could not escape seeing lots of Jewish in the street. Look at the street signs, the shop signs. They were written in Hebrew characters, in the Yiddish variation. So this is, you see, confection fabric. They would do some stitching and sewing and so on. Or this shop used to sell kerosene at the time. You used to go and get kerosene from the shop. Now we tell them, careful when you fix up and you renovate a house, gently, carefully remove the plaster because you don't know what you'll find underneath. Everywhere we like to remember the righteous among the nations. This particular one, Ona Shimaite, she smuggled Jews from the ghetto and brought them to safety. We'll see a small wooden barrack that houses a small Holocaust museum. Outside is a statue made by a Japanese artist. Why Japanese, we'll find out later on. Inside, we have an attempt, I would say, to tell the whole story of the Holocaust in Lithuania into one small building. Now, they're moving it when they'll finish fixing this building. This building used to be the library which continued functioning through the times of the ghetto. Imagine in the ghetto, they were sending late notes to the people in the ghetto. They should return the books. When the 100,000th book was lent, they made a party in the theater. There is another big, beautiful, modern Jewish museum set in a beautiful 19th century palace, and it has a fabulous collection. You might have seen these in different countries, the stumbling stones. That was an initiative of a German artist who started doing it in Germany, and it spread from one to another, and it went to Holland and Czech Republic, all over, and now it comes to Lithuania. These stumbling stones are put outside the houses where Jewish people lived. They have the name of the person, the year he was born, and the fact here is indicated that he was in the Vilnius ghetto, deported to Ponar in 1943, and whoever was deported to Ponar, as we'll find out, was shot and killed right there. Rabbi the Gaon of Vilna was buried in the old Jewish cemetery in Shnipishok. That cemetery was pulled down because they had to make room for a sport complex to be built on top. The second cemetery from the 19th century was also demolished. They picked up some of the tombstones that were legible and in good shape. Most of them did not survive. And now this is the modern, new cemetery where people were buried, and some remains were brought here from the previous cemeteries, the ones that could be identified. Most notably is the Vilna Gaon. Gaon means a genius. And right next to him, they have the ashes of the convert, Ger Tzedek, the Graf Potocki, that Polish nobleman. Memorial to the victims of the ghetto. And we'll talk about another interesting person. Anton Schmidt was a Nazi officer who was a mensch. He was a kind person, and he helped and he saved the life of many Jews. When the Germans found about it, they killed him. While the war is still raging, they executed him. Another officer ran a very interesting project here in these buildings, which are right next to the old town. These buildings were built by Baron Hirsch. Not too many people know about him, even though he was not less comfortable, to say the least, and not less charitable than the Rothschilds. Unfortunately, his only son got killed in an accident while he was still around, and he didn't have any successors. So nobody knows. In Israel, there are lots of places named after him, and he helped build a few communities. Here, he built these houses for the poor people of the Vilna Jewish neighborhood, and the poor Jews lived in this area. When the Jews were taken elsewhere, when the ghetto was liquidated, hundreds of them were brought here, where they worked in a car repair shop. Another officer tipped their ears. He said, tomorrow the Germans are going to come for everybody, in a very subtle way. And many people managed to escape. Unfortunately, the ones who were still here, who didn't have an idea where to go, or were too weak to go anywhere, were killed right here, just days, hours literally before the Russians came to liberate. That officer, it took us a long time to find out who he is, Flagge. And once we found out, we added his name to the wall in Yad Vashem. And here is a lady who is actually a survivor of HKP, Herrenskraftpark, the car repair shop, which he has helped save the Jews. Look at an aerial photography of the region. This is the city of Vilnius, the train station, the ghetto, and Lukishki. That was the jail. It was from here that people were led on the way to Ponar. Ponar was the killing field. Some of them were kept in this jail, which we saw on the aerial photography. The others walked all the way to Ponar. They called it Panerai today in the Lithuanian language. Before the war, it was a fun place. People will come for a picnic, for vacation, for sports activities, but now it is one of the saddest places. The Jews were driven from the only gate of the big ghetto, marched through the streets on the way to the camp. The camp had very few barracks. Nobody stayed here overnight. Jews were brought here, and hours later, they were all killed. That was the most incredible project. Look what happened. They've surrounded the whole area with barbed wire fences, and what they found here were 7 huge pits. They were built by the Russians in 1940 so they can contain fuel tanks for the airplanes. The airport is nearby. And the Russians wanted to have spare amount of fuel, and they built these pits. And the Germans saw it, my goodness, it's so handy. They would march the Jews, they will build this kind of path, boarded up with some fences. The Jews, we don't see it in this picture, but in this picture we see, you see they had to take off their shirts, cover their heads, they were lined up along the ditches, and they were shot. Some of them were shot right by the last days. Most of these people are a special unit of the Sonderkommando, we'll talk about in a minute. Today, where the pits are, we have these memorials. One of the pits has an interesting story with the ladder. When they saw they were losing the war, in an attempt to hide any evidence of their heinous crimes, they made a bunch of Jews come remove the dirt from the bodies that were buried there and exhume them and burn them. So imagine people have to do this gruesome job where somebody found the remains and the bodies that were not remains so much of both his wife and his daughter. This is a very famous song that was written by maybe the most outstanding Yiddish poet, Abraham Sutzkever, and you'll be able to read it. And another song which was written, and that one is also has the music, and you can listen to it if you click later on your own on this link. The song was written during the time of the ghetto by a Jewish doctor. His 11 years old son has composed, and it is one of the most typical and most significant stories of the Ponar event. We come to visit it. You know, we bring visitors not only to Auschwitz and the camps in Poland. Here in this particular case, you see Israeli army officers visiting this site. I want to talk about this lady, Fania Bransovska. She has just celebrated her 99th birthday last Saturday. Thank God she's still around. And here she is marching this past Memorial Day on the way to Ponar, always every year on September 23rd. That's the time when Holocaust is remembered in Lithuania. The president of the company in an official ceremony, the president of the country, of course, and everybody comes here. Here is Fania at 98 and a half in September. And at the height of the ceremony, she's singing here the partisan song with this lady that you will hear in the video clip. Now, this lady, Maria, she's not Jewish, but she's so fascinated with everything Jewish. She speaks Yiddish better than anybody else. She's a professor in the Vilnius University, professor of anthropology, a musician and a singer, and she does really an amazing job in this area. Another outstanding person is David Katz, a professor of Yiddish language, Brooklyn-born, British educated, who's been living now in Lithuania. Please click on the link and go into his website. He is defending history, literally. There are so many attempts of Holocaust denials and so many attempts to make the collaborators with the Nazis into national heroes because supposedly they were fighting against the Russians with the Germans, let alone the fact that in the process, so many thousands of Jews lost their life. So look him up, he's a fascinating person. There is one more synagogue, but that's not a Jewish synagogue. That's a Karaite synagogue. You know, the Karaite Judaism has separated and split off mainstream Judaism in the already back in the end of the 8th century. And it was here that they were brought from the Crimean Peninsula back in the 14th century, because they were known to be tough fighters, and they settled in this community, which at that time was the capital of the uh, Lithuanian duchy. It was not a kingdom, it was a duchy. That's their synagogue. They called it, you see, Kenesa. This building dates back to the 18th century. Here we have some pictures from inside. When you talk to them, they don't say they're Jews. Say, no, we are Karaite. We are a religion related to Moses, but they will not bring themselves to say that they are Jews. You know they are Jews when you see their houses. They are the only people who were allowed for centuries to have 3 windows facing the street. Everybody else had 2 windows, but they were very privileged. This castle was the seat of the Grand Duke. It's a beautiful, beautiful castle in the Leg district, surrounded by water from all directions. And the whole place is absolutely stunning and very, very beautiful. If you visit Lithuania at one time, make sure, it's a little costly but worthwhile, take a hot air balloon above the city with the spires and above this community, which is called Trakai. We'll continue driving from Trakai. By the way, when the Germans saw Hebrew writing in the synagogue, they said they are Jews. Said, no, we are not Jews. They went to the rabbi, and the rabbi realized that if he says they are Jews, they will be killed. And the rabbi said, no, they are not Jews. The rabbi was killed. They chopped his head off and put it in the window in the neighborhood in Kaunas, and they all survived. All the Karaites survived. During the period between 2 world wars, Kaunas was the capital of independent Lithuania, because Vilnius was part of Poland, first occupied by the Russians, then the Germans. After Operation Barbarossa took over. So Kaunas was the seat of the government, not as beautiful, pleasant town, but not as beautiful as Vilnius. The synagogue is very impressive. I'm very moved by this table in the synagogue. The table here lists the Yortzeit, the memorial days, for the dozens and dozens of small communities around this area in this county. What is shocking is you see some communities have 2 dates. You see Männer and Freuen, one day for the ladies and the next day, sorry, for the men and the next day for the ladies. Here is for the children. Again, they used to have these big actions. They'll come round up the children and they were never seen. In town, we'll see a statue of a very interesting person, Avraham Mapu. To you, it might not be known, but Adi and others in Israel will be able to tell you there is hardly a city that doesn't have a Mapu street. He was the first writer to write novels, fiction in Hebrew. Until then, Hebrew was used either for religious purposes or poetry that had to do with Judaics, and he wrote beautiful love stories, and his statue stands here in the street, which bears his name in Kaunas. A Maccabi club was set up here in 1920. This is when they removed, you see, into COVID already, they removed the plaque from a memorial that was erected here to commemorate it. Before the Germans started killing, soon as the fascist, ultra-nationalist Lithuanians realized the Russians are gone and now the Germans are gonna come, let's start taking care of these Jews. A devilish movie was produced about the Jews and how they harmed the world. And now they go in the street and they rounded up many people at random. They brought them into a garage. Sorry for the graphic details. They shoved a hose into their mouth and closed their mouth tightly and turned the water on. People imploded from the inside. That's the horrible story of the Lietukas garage. And here we have the memorial of this event. Look at the map of Kaunas. Lietuka garage is in the middle of the city. The ghetto was set up here on the other side of the river. What's interesting to see, you see Fort 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so on. and we'll concentrate on the 9th fort. Why do we have all these forts around? During the time of the Tsar, they were afraid, as I mentioned earlier, always of invasions of the Germans, the Prussians, who were next door. And that's why they have surrounded the city with many forts. It was to these forts that the Jews were taken from the ghetto to be killed. Now we'll see some pictures from the Kovno ghetto. This is the place which is the most documented ghetto in the whole continent, thanks to this man. This was George Kadish. He was an amateur photographer, and because he worked in the X-ray department in the hospital, he had access to the filming material, to the glass, to the celluloids, and the different chemical solutions to process and develop. So he has collected hundreds of pictures from the ghetto. When you'll visit, not far from you, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, there is a huge wall in the Holocaust Memorial in DC featuring hundreds of his pictures that he took inside the ghetto. Also here was the case where a main street goes through the ghetto and they needed to let the public go through, so they built a bridge. You see, the Jews were on this side and on the other side, and to get from one place to the other, they had to take this bridge. One of the most famous pictures, which really shocked everybody later on, because for the longest time people didn't know. In one of the houses he went into, because he had the permit to stay working in the hospital, he saw that on the wall, one of the people, before dying, using his own blood, has written on the walls, Eden, Nekome, Jews, revenge, and he died. And he made sure to smuggle this picture out, and that's how he was able to convince the world. Who could believe? What are you talking about? All these people. Another letter was sent by the chairman of the Kovno Ghetto Jewish Council, Dr. Elhanan Elkes. Luckily, his children both were in England studying, and he wrote a very, very moving letter. The letter was written in the most beautiful Hebrew, and he managed to send it to them, and they got it, but of course he did not survive. One of the stories is the story of the hospital. There was a Jewish hospital inside a Jewish orphanage, and it was an incredible doctor, Dr. Petras Baublis, who managed to save the life of dozens of Jews. He would smuggle them when he would come in and out of the ghetto, gave them to his friends and acquaintances, and that's how he managed to save the life of dozens and dozens of Jewish children. 3,000 Jews from the ghetto were killed in the 7th fort, but the numbers get much worse in the 9th fort. 9th fort is the vast, largest killing field in the area here in the vicinity of Kovno. In Ponar, there were 70,000 Jews who were killed. Here, the figures move from 30 to 50. We'll probably never know how many people were killed here. Here is a sign that says 30,000 Jews from Lithuania and other European countries. Many of them were made to stand against the walls where they were shot. You can still see the bullet holes, the shooting marks on the walls. And what's upsetting is that you see near this wall, the Nazis shot and burned people without indicating the fact that they were Jews. And all of these people were Jews. There was not a single non-Jew who was killed here. This memorial, for me, is one of the most impressive Holocaust memorials anywhere. It stands right outside the 9th fort. And in the last few years after independence, we get more and more of these signs put here. The city of Vienna is mourning the loss of its citizens. The city of Munich, this city and the others. So they keep adding because Jews were brought here from all over. And that's where they would hold the ceremonies. What is incredible is at least the story of this convoy. There was one convoy that traveled from France, arrived here. The people were kept inside the jail, where one of them has inscribed, you see, he etched on the wall using a pocket knife. He wrote his name, Jules Hershkovitz, originally from Anvers. Anvers in French is for Antwerpen, Belgium. but he has fled down. He went to Monaco. Imagine Monaco on the shores of the Mediterranean, but he was captured by the French people. That was Vichy government, and the French there collaborated with the German, and he was sent via Drancy. Drancy was this transit camp right outside of Paris to Kaunas, to Kovno, where he was killed the next day. We'll never understand what was the logic, schlepping these people thousands of miles across the whole continent, only to be killed the next day. On a little of a brighter side, we'll talk about some incredible people. This is Jan Zwartendijk, a Dutchman, who was the director of the Philips factory in Kaunas. You know, Philips was making and still does lots of electronics. At that time, they were producing radio machines. He saw the plight of the Jews who were trying to get out. Many of them had money, but they couldn't get out because nobody would give them a visa. Nobody had a document. He came with the most brilliant idea. If you say you travel to Curacao and Aruba and Suriname, which were Dutch colonies in the Caribbean Sea, in the Southern Caribbean, you don't need a visa. You can get there. With that idea, he traveled to Riga and met with the Dutch ambassador, who said, sure, go ahead. And he appointed himself to be the Dutch consul in Kaunas. With that idea, he went to the Japanese consulate, where he managed to talk to this amazing person, Chiyune Sugihara, born in January 1st, 1900, very easy date to remember. He was a diplomat who traveled a lot and he knew people, and he was a very sensitive person. When he saw these people lining up, trying to get out of this country to go somewhere, he started issuing visas. First, he telegraphed, he sent the cable to the foreign office and they said, hell no. He said, we must help these people. And they said, hell no. So he said, if I obey my government, I disobey and I betray my God. And he issued 3,600 visas, which saved the life of over 6,000 people. These are actual people standing outside his house. And here you see the transit visa that was given first from the Dutch person, and then you see journey, somebody is traveling to Suriname or Curacao and other Netherlands colonies, and the Japanese consul stamped it, and with that stamp, with that visa, they could board the train. This is a book that was published recently. You might find it very, very interesting. Written and published by his widow. She also passed away a few years ago. I was very fortunate to have met both. And that's how they traveled. They traveled from Kaunas to Moscow, where they would board the Trans-Siberian train. You travel for 8 days till you get to Vladivostok, and then you get the boat to go to Japan. Unfortunately, many of them were sent into a ghetto that was set up in Shanghai, but there they did not treat them badly and they survived. Nobody ever went, look where Curacao is. Nobody went to Curacao. They ended up going to Canada, the United States, Australia, Israel, different countries, and that's how they survived. It took us a long time to find him. He was stripped of his medals and decoration. He lost his pension. When he came back to Japan, he had to resort to traveling as a traveling salesman in Soviet Russia, selling all kinds of cheap Japanese trinkets for 15 years. Until one day he came for a visit, and one of the survivors who came from Israel came to Japan looking for him, and he literally found him in the street, and that's how it was revealed who he was and what he did. He never told anybody. Here he meets in Jerusalem with Zerach Varavtik, one of the people he saved, who was a minister in the Israeli government. So in the house where the consulate used to be, you see they have a foundation, Diplomats for Life, in Sugihara House. This is a very special museum that was erected in Japan, in his town. This is the tree he planted in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. We named lots of streets. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, we named the square in Jerusalem after Sugihara. This is his son. His son was given a scholarship. He studied in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He speaks Hebrew fluently, and they keep adding more and more decorations. I got these matches a couple months ago, outside the hotel. When he had to close down the consulate, he moved into this hotel where he continued issuing visas. When the time came to leave, he boarded the train, and the people were running after the train, and he said, "What's your name?" Moshe Goldstein. "What's your name?" Shmuel Ziegelboim. And then when the train ran faster, he just threw all the documents and the stamps, let them forge and continue trying to get out of the place. I love what they did with the memorial. It's supposed to remind us of the paper cranes. You know, paper cranes in Japan are a symbol of freedom and liberty. His son and his family is so connected to us. A few months ago, the director of the museum passed away at age 59, a very interesting person, Shimon, and he asked us to wait, and he took the plane and he came to participate in the funeral. That's the cemetery here in Kaunas. Driving on the way back to Kaunas, we'll stop at a tiny little town, the town of Zezma, Zezmarie, they call it today in Lithuanian. This house used to be the house of the rabbi, a very prominent existence, and it was a very, I would say, comfortable community. In the 19th century, they built this big, beautiful wooden synagogue, typical of wooden synagogues of this part of the world. After years, of course, nobody used it. It became a dump. They used it as a warehouse. So they would collect all kinds of old items inside, and the growth was threatening. The roof was caving in. Here we have a picture of the time when the synagogue still existed. And when we came inside and it was filthy, they started cleaning it up and fixing. And we found some Hebrew writing and ads for all kinds of Jewish items to be sold in the store. And that's what it looks like now. They've totally renovated this synagogue, and I think it's definitely very special. Unfortunately, there is so much to be done all over the country. I showed you the map. There were hundreds and hundreds of communities and dozens of cemeteries. And you know, if you don't tend to it, if you don't clean it, the overgrowth will cover it in no time. And now there is a big wave within the local communities when they realize they cannot separate the history of their towns and villages from the history of the Jews and the presence of the Jews in those countries. So now they arrange hundreds and hundreds of volunteers who come to clear, to cut, and to clean and to fix and to preserve to whatever possible extent for God knows how long. It's definitely not going to last forever. But I am very moved by this gesture, and it's a little way of paying back and balancing the acts of the miserable deniers which are there. You know, the lady Fania, she published her memoirs, where she, after fleeing the ghetto, she became a member of the partisans, and she was fighting along with the Russians. And they were also fighting the local Lithuanian collaborators with the Germans. Now, can you imagine, at 99, officially she is wanted by the Lithuanian police for crimes perpetuated against Lithuanian, what do you call it? Like not nationalists, like distinguished citizens, patriots. Patriots is the word. So I like to balance it with this notion of the cemeteries. Ponar, and subsequently the fire that was set up in all of these places for us in Israel, we decided to forge it and tool it as an instrument. I'll only read the first part because this is something that we literally live by. We are brought up with it. We choose to hold on to it. From that fire which scarred your tortured and scorched bodies, we picked brands, torches to light up our souls. And with them, we also lit the flame of freedom. With them, we went into battle on our soil. You'll be able to read the rest of it when you'll get the presentation. I'm going to send it to Karen. And I'd like to apologize for having rushed you so quickly through so many stories. And thank you for coming and listening to me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jacob. That was incredible. I really want to thank you for being here, for doing this presentation for us. I want to stress that I think the importance of this presentation for us right now, especially where we stand right now in the world, and what is going on in the world. I want to stress, of course, that Adi, Rachel, and I work very hard to put these programs together and to find tour guides like Jacob who do an incredible job talking to us about the past and what happened in the past and where our ancestors came from and Jewish history. But of course, the second part of our job, and a very meaningful part of our job, is what is going on today in the world around us, and the anti-Semitism that is going on, the anti-Zionism that is going on, the Holocaust denial that is going on, which Jacob touched on a lot. And what we are seeing a lot at the Baltimore Zionist District is the rise in anti-Semitism. And just this week alone, there's reports from the ADL that anti-Semitism alone was up 68%. And, you know, just on social media, the hashtag was trending that Hitler didn't do enough. Hitler was right. There was horrible acts of anti-Semitism in New York, in LA, in London, Holocaust analogies that are demonizing Zionists. Last Sunday, 2 people shattered windows in synagogue in Stokey, Illinois. In Bal Harbor, Florida, there were police investigating a Jewish family that said 4 men in SUVs hurled anti-Semitic slurs in there. And really, I could go on for about as long as Jacob did, and I don't want to, but there is a lot of information. And if you get our newsletters and if you follow us on United Against Anti-Semitism on our Facebook page, which we have about 3,000 people in that group, then you can follow along and see all the anti-Semitism that is going on. The point that I want to make is that we always talk about never again. And unfortunately, for us as a Jewish community, never is now. And what's important about Jacob's program is that we really do hope and we really do want you to take this program once we send it to you and to share it with your friends, to share it with your colleagues, to share it with your families, especially those that are younger, your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, and to really put an emphasis on the fact that we are in a situation right now where it's important for younger people to understand that we are in a state of a very high rise in anti-Semitism, where this could happen again, and it is happening again. And we want to share that with as many young people as possible, because they do need to stand up. We see a lot of young people in our in the organization where they're not standing up, and they're falling into a trap of social media, that they're sharing things that are not true and that are against Israel and against Zionism. And it's really something that we don't want to see, and we do want to educate them properly. And of course, the BZD is always here to help, to speak, myself, Adi, Rachel, any of our tour guides, any of our board members. So we are here, of course, for that. With that being said, Jacob, thank you again. I do have some questions, which I lost with all the comments. So let me go up and find them really fast. Adi was so good to send them to me in numbered order. Hold on. Okay, great. Here we go. Okay. Are Jews moving back to these countries? And if so, what is Jewish life what is Jewish life like now in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania? That's our first question.
Thank you. So no Jews really are moving to these places. Some of them are being sent there either to study or to work, representing various companies. Lots of Israelis are there, teaching, working, whether it's for the embassy, for the airlines, for various corporations. But the Jewish experience there is very casual. Most of them are totally secular. Very few people who are not even Orthodox, not Orthodox Jews, but like religious to a certain point, are there. And those Chabad rabbis in the three countries are trying to provide, whatever kind of, Jewish services and Jewish address to whatever spiritual and practical needs people want to celebrate, to have a Yortzeit, Kaddish, whatever. We have embassies in those countries, except for Estonia, where the Israeli ambassador in Finland is a guest, ambassador to Estonia. But we have very good relations with these countries. They repeatedly vote for us in international forums, United Nations. They usually are on our side when there are issues discussed and debated at the European Union. But in the street and among some intellectual circles, as the case would be, and the media, as Karen has mentioned, there is these horrible stories of the denial, and you cannot help but think that being today anti-Israeli is just another way of good old Jew hate. I'm sorry to say it so bluntly, but that's what happens.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Can you clarify, who does Litvak refer to? Is it Latvianians or Lithuanians?
So, directly translated, you would think it's only the Lithuanians, but because the borders were drawn arbitrarily, these are modern borders. Jews have lived there for centuries. When you say Litvaks about the Jews, it means Jews who lived in Lithuania, in Latvia, in Belarus, and northeastern Poland. That's the land of the Litvaks.
Great. Who took the stones from the cemeteries and moved them? Isn't that prohibited by Judaism? Building on a cemetery and therefore desecrating it.
If I'll put now a list of the dozens and dozens of cemeteries ransacked and built upon, worse, in Vilnius, there was a huge hill with some kind of social club on top of the hill. The stairs leading up the hill to get to the building were all taken from the cemetery, from the Jewish cemetery. And in many houses, you turn the stones over. They built like a trough for their animals in the villages and so on, because they found this already easily available building material. The stones were nicely chiseled, they were carved, they were expensive building materials. They brought them from far away, beautiful granite and whatever, marble. And unfortunately, that is done in many places. Actually, even as we speak now, in Vilnius, there is a big debate about demolishing whatever is left of yet another old cemetery for another convention center they're going to build. So it's a heated debate that takes place even now when we speak.
Is there anything left of the Jewish community in Vilna? And second part to that question, are there any records of the Jews that perished in that town?
So very few records were kept in the towns, in the towns themselves, because most of these towns, they didn't have like a decent city hall with archives and registry. Very few of them survived. The Jewish community keeps collecting. There are a couple genealogists. If somebody is looking for a specific name, a specific family, I will send you, Karen, the information about a local genealogist they can write to and help. Yad Vashem, of course, is doing an incredible job in collecting the names and adding them to the lists. And the Washington Memorial, the Holocaust Memorial in Washington. But I think the best work, if you don't find it easily, is either through the genealogist, or you might know the name of this wonderful website, Jewish Gen. You know Jewish Gen? That's where people can look up lots of information. If not about the individual families, a lot about the towns, you know, the shtetls, the villages, the townships they came from.
Great. Wonderful. Jacob, where do you lead tours now? Some people are asking.
Oh, I didn't lead the tour now in 15 months. I came back to Israel. I interrupted a beautiful trip in Peru. On March 14, I say to the people, the tour is over now. Let's go home. And I managed to find a flight from Lima to Newark and came to Israel on the 16th, where I went, of course, right into quarantine. And the group was from California. They said, we didn't hear anything in the American media. We're going to continue the tour, which, of course, that very night, they were almost, I should hate to say, rounded up. And they had to be locked up for 8 days in the hotel in Lima, right at the airport. They couldn't leave the room, not only leave the hotel, they couldn't leave the room. And what was devastating was they saw the Israeli aircrafts. Israel sent, you know, like an airlift to bring over 1,000 Israelis who were stranded there, free of charge, of course, to bring them to Israel. And they couldn't even contact the American embassy. They had to charter a plane at $18,000 per person to fly them to Miami, 100 people. And from Miami, they struggled to get back to California. But now I'm looking into hopefully some more tours. The next tour I hope I will take will be Poland in August. In October, I'm supposed to go to Morocco. I hope it will work. And then there are people who are planning to come to Israel, where I'm a tour guide, where I love doing it. And hopefully they'll come. Hopefully the conditions will allow, between COVID-19 and a crazy missile situation we've had now, that will certainly affect, I'm sure, many people. You see, unfortunately, we have been through it so often.
Yes.
But as you heard from Adi, I lead tours in many, many countries all over the world. Just tell me where you want to go. Let's round up some people. Let's go from Latin America, Southeast Asia, and all over Europe. It's a tiny but beautiful countries and very, very rich in art, in culture, architecture, and Jewish history and Jewish culture.
Well, it sounds fantastic. And again, thank you so much for being with us. And we will hopefully make the roundup for a trip somewhere soon. I've been nowhere near 98 countries, maybe 5-ish. So I need to catch up at some point when my kids are out of my hair. But thank you again. I really did mean what I said, though. We will send out these presentation. Please, we will send the contact information for Jacob, of course, in the email. And we appreciate all your donations, all your contributions. The tour sponsorships, of course, are always wonderful, so we can keep these going. Thank you again, Jacob. We will have Jacob with us again soon. We've already been in talks with him about our next tour, which we are excited about. Next week, I wrote it down. Next week, same time, same place, Wednesday at 11. We are going live on a walking tour to Arad, Romania. So please join us. So we are very excited about that. And that will be with our tour guide, Adi. We had him before, live.
Ronnie.
Ronnie.
Yeah,
Ron.
Travel to Live from Romania, and it's next Tuesday, not Wednesday. Thank you.
A Tuesday. Did I say Wednesday?
Yes.
I haven't.